Hi folks, welcome back and buckle up, because if you thought the left couldn't get any dumber, well, they just shifted in an overdrive and peeled out into full clown mode. We're living in a time where basic freedom, like say buying a Cybertruck, is treated like a hate crime if it doesn't come along with a F Elon bumper sticker and a trigger warning. Democrats screech about fascism while throwing digital and real Molotovs at anyone who dares to think differently. In today's episode of Progressive Paranoia Part 168 with a Vengeance, we've got a liberal man so deranged by a woman driving a Cybertruck, you'd think she ran over his pronouns. It's the perfect snapshot of the ideological whiplash we're currently living through, where buying the wrong car makes you a Nazi, and unhinged outrage is just another day in the brave resistance. So let's get into it.
What's wrong with you?
You know you're driving the car of a Nazi.
Dude.
I gave 3 Heil Hitler salutes.
What is wrong with this man?
He's a Nazi.
So what do you want me to do about
Sell
it?
your car.
Are you serious?
Yeah, sell your car.
What is wrong with you?
Fuck out of here.
Don't.
You're driving the car of a Nazi.
You're
the
going-
guy is a Nazi.
You're going to go to jail.
You.
You're gonna go to jail.
I'm not doing anything
You're
except
gonna go-
cussing at you.
Okay.
I'm glad
me.
you're filming me.
Touch me and you will go to
I'm not
jail.
going to do anything violent.
Touch. It doesn't matter.
You're just an asshole because you bought the car of a Nazi. The guy's a Nazi. Now leave.
Yeah, seriously.
Well, let's talk about the cultural psychosis behind a man screaming at a woman in a parking lot because she dared to buy a Tesla. Not because she cut him off in traffic or hit his car, but because she purchased a vehicle made by someone he's decided is a Nazi. This isn't political discourse. This is religious zealotry dressed up as activism. It's what happens when moral reasoning is replaced by tribal outrage, and when identity becomes so central to your worldview that a truck becomes a symbol of ultimate sin. Now let's unpack the real story here, because it's not even about Elon Musk. It's not even about Tesla. This is about how the modern left, especially in urban and academic circles, has trained an entire generation to react emotionally instead of thinking critically. They've weaponized identity and trauma language to point where disagreement is violence and car ownership is complicity and genocide. It's not logic, it's liturgy. The Church of Woke doesn't convert, it straight up just condemns. And to be clear, this man isn't protesting any sort of injustice. He's throwing a tantrum in public, convinced his hysteria is righteous because he's absorbed years of media, university, and influencer rhetoric that equates offense with truth and outrage with justice. It's the inevitable result of a worldview where the moral high ground is always shifting, where last year's hero is this year's fascist, and your neighbor is evil for not reading the right blogs. And this isn't an isolated incident. It's emblematic of how the left is losing control of the cultural narrative. They spent decades building an ideological empire based on moral absolutism, but with no fixed standard. That empire is now cannibalizing itself, screaming Nazi at anyone who steps out of line, even if that line is a checkout at a car dealership. Meanwhile, normal people, working class Americans, independents, disaffected liberals, and there are many of them, are watching the circus and realizing they want nothing to do with it. Because when every personal choice becomes a political battleground, people just simply check out. They have too many of their own problems to deal with, bills to pay, children to feed, so they just unplug. And in that vacuum, the left loses what it once dominated: influence over everyday culture. By the way, we didn't get here overnight. It took years of institutions like universities, Hollywood, newsrooms normalizing emotional manipulation and ideological purity tests. Now we're watching the endgame: paranoia, projection, and public freakouts over a Cybertruck. So if you're wondering why Trump is back in office, why independents are all of a sudden leaning red, or why Elon Musk is now running a federal agency, look no further than this parking lot prophet screaming about fascism while embodying everything he claims to oppose. And on the other side of leftist orthodoxy is a race hustle. Let's see how that's panning out for the mayor of Chicago, Brandon Johnson.
Why wouldn't I speak to Black Chicago? Why wouldn't I? Black Chicago and Black people in America have borne the brunt of the type of policies and the maneuvering and the humiliating tactics that are coming from the federal government right now. It's not a secret. Who is going to be mad at the fact that we have to prioritize spaces in the city that have been harmed the most?
Well, we just watched. Isn't the race hustle rearing its ugly head? It's the end goal of leftism in action. It's why Mayor Brandon Johnson is now under federal investigation for what the Department of Justice calls race-based discrimination in hiring. At the center of the probe are remarks Johnson made a few days ago during a church panel on Chicago's South Side. Comments that made it painfully clear he views city leadership not as a service to all residents, but as a tool to elevate one racial group above the rest. And let's be clear, this isn't about representation, it's about intent. The allocation of power and the use of public resources being explicitly tied to race in a city where the mayor openly brags about putting his people first. Now, the DOJ's investigation, authorized by Assistant Attorney General Harmeet Dillon, points to multiple remarks where Johnson not only listed his black appointees by race, but explicitly said he was doing so to ensure that our people get a chance to grow their business. That's not diversity. That's discrimination dressed in the language of historical justice. This comes just weeks after Trump's administration launched broader efforts to dismantle DEI mandates, investigating schools and municipalities that are using racial categories to distribute benefits or impose hiring quotas. And Johnson, he's doubling down, not backing off, accusing the federal government of humiliating tactics and brushing off criticism as if he's the victim in all of this. And that's exactly what we saw in the clip we just watched. Johnson unapologetically wraps the whole thing in a moral shield, historical pain, he says. And no one is denying that black Americans have faced injustices in the past, but using that pain as a permanent blank check to override neutral laws, that's where the line gets crossed. The Civil Rights Act of 1964 wasn't written to institutionalize racial favoritism in the opposite direction. It was designed to end it, period. What Johnson is doing is redefining justice as payback. And in that worldview, equality isn't the goal. It's another phase of power redistribution. Next, the phrase, spaces harmed the most, has become the progressive version of a Trojan horse. It sounds moral, it sounds good, but what it often means in practice is race-based policymaking, veiled in geography and equity jargon. The moment you say, we're prioritizing those who suffered, the question becomes, how are you defining harm? Who decides which groups are owed? And how long does that debt last? When does the scorecard get cleared? And unsurprisingly, none of these activist lawmakers ever have an answer for any of those questions. Now, Johnson's administration has cited its diversity breakdown as a point of pride. He says 34% black, 24% Hispanic, 30% white, and 7% Asian. But numbers don't tell the full story. It's why those people were hired that matters. If you explicitly say you're giving jobs, contracts, and power based on race, you're not building diversity. You're resurrecting the exact thing civil rights laws were trying to stop. Culturally, this moment exposes something deeper. For years, progressives have preached that equity means correcting past injustices through present-day preferences. But now that this ideology has real consequences, federal lawsuits, budget threats, public backlash, they're shifting into victim mode. The same people who screamed accountability under Trump's first term are crying foul now that the laws they once used against others are being applied to them. And again, it also reveals how fragile the left's cultural dominance has become. 10 years ago, this kind of rhetoric would be cheered by universities, echoed by media, and protected by bureaucratic inertia. Today, there's real legal pushback. And that tells you something is shifting. The public is tired of being gaslit, tired of watching cities crumble while mayors brag about racial hiring checklists like it's a virtue instead of a violation. Ultimately, this moment isn't just about Brandon Johnson. It's about the future of civil rights and whether we're going to keep letting political leaders weaponize identity to carve up the public square. Because if justice is race-based, then there isn't justice. It's just revenge with a new color palette. And the American people across race, class, and party are waking up to that. And speaking of the politics of racial grievance, you can't really have a conversation about it without talking about South Africa. Here are comments recently made by their president.
None of us ever having to want to run away to another country for fictional reasons that we are being persecuted. We are united in diversity, and none of us should ever feel that they have lost courage, that they've now become cowards and want to run. Ons bly hier, ons is Suid-Afrikaners, en ons gaan hier bly.
We need to have an honest conversation about what it means when the president of an entire country, like in this case, South Africa, this being Cyril Ramaphosa, looks directly at their population of their own citizens and calls them cowards for wanting to flee the country, not because they committed a crime, not because they're traitors, but because they're white and increasingly unsafe in that country. According to Ramaphosa, white South Africans, particularly Afrikaners, are fleeing for fictional reasons, and those who leave are spineless deserters. Forget the rising farm attacks, forget the calls from elected officials, actual parliament members chanting "kill the Boer." None of that, according to the president, is real. The only crime here is not sticking around to play sacrificial lamb for a collapsing state. Now, to be clear, this isn't just a local scandal. It's a snapshot of how post-colonial ideology has rotted into something truly grotesque, a justification for ethnic scapegoating under the banner of diversity. When you peel back the rhetoric, what you see is a toxic blend of historical grievance weaponized as permanent moral license to literally kill. In Ramaphosa's version of unity, there is no mutual respect, only submission and submission now, and it will cost your life. And we'll pretend like it's not happening at the same time. And if you object, if you protect your family by seeking asylum, you're not a victim, you're a coward. That's the twisted calculus. And here's the real kicker. This kind of rhetoric isn't really limited to South Africa. It's echoed, even if more politely, in Western institutions every single day. Here in America, we've seen years of the left building an academic, media, and political ecosystem where certain demographics are told they're oppressors by default. That the only way to reconcile the past is through perpetual guilt, public self-flagellation, and silence. The racial equity industry doesn't see individuals, it sees power categories. And once you're placed in the oppressor box, there's no nuance, no context, no exit. You are fated to the worst outcomes possible. Ramaphosa's statement is a case study in what happens when grievance politics becomes governance, when it becomes the leader of that country, when the narrative becomes so untouchable that any dissent, even self-preservation, is painted as betrayal. It's not just dishonest, it's dangerous. And it tells us something deeply unsettling about the global trajectory of left-wing identitarian politics. When the mask of moral superiority slips, what's left is raw resentment and a growing comfort with dehumanization, so long as it's directed at the right people. And make no mistake, folks, this is where America would be headed if Kamala Harris had been elected president. The left used to pride itself on opposing apartheid. Now some of its ideological cousins celebrate the soft apartheid in reverse. Land seizures, political targeting, racial quotas, and they call it justice. But justice without standards becomes vengeance. And when that vengeance is institutionalized, those who speak up or simply walk away are smeared as enemies of progress. So when President Ramaphosa says those fleeing are cowards, what he's really doing is issuing a warning. Stay in your place. Don't question the narrative. Don't seek safety. Don't challenge power if you're not the right kind of oppressed. And if you do, don't expect sympathy. Expect scorn. That's not unity, that's ideological extortion. And if you think this mindset ends at South Africa's borders, you haven't been paying any attention.
You've taken us back to the 17th century. In that case, shouldn't everybody leave the property to the Khoisan, who are thought to be the native occupants of South Africa?
No, actually, Africa and South Africa, it belongs to the Bantu people. It belongs to the Ngunis. So it belongs to the people of Africa.
What about Tavi here?
We are not saying it doesn't belong here. Now that we are living together here, our perspective is that the land must go back to the chiefs, the traditional leaders, and the state. We are unapologetic about this. Land must be expropriated without compensation.
According to the president of South Africa, what we just saw isn't happening. That genocidal rhetoric from that activist, the open call to seize land without compensation, to hand it over to tribal chiefs in the state, non-existent. It's fiction. I guess we're all just living through a collective fever dream then, because according to Cyril Ramaphosa, the president of South Africa, the real problem isn't the escalating farm attacks or the chance of kill the boar in parliament or the steady exodus of terrified white families. No, the problem is that some white South Africans have the audacity to leave. He calls them cowards, traitors, not victims of a collapsing state, but deserters who just couldn't stomach progress, when in fact this is what's actually happening under his leadership. And that's the tell, because when your government is denying reality while punishing those who recognize it, you're not in a democracy, you're in totalitarianism. One where historical grievance is used not to reconcile, but to erase. We just watched a man proudly argue that justice means repossessing land from a racial group and handing it to the ruling elite, not based on merit, not based on law, but based on bloodline and political convenience. And yet Ramaphosa tells us this is unity. That's not unity, it's ideological gaslighting. But this kind of rhetoric doesn't actually exist in a vacuum. It mirrors the same worldview we already unpacked earlier in this video with Mayor Brandon Johnson in Chicago. Same script, different accent and geography. Whether it's South African activists calling for racial land seizures or American mayors boasting about putting our people first in hiring decisions, meaning primarily hiring black people and giving out city contracts primarily to black-run firms, The underlying belief is the same. Justice means flipping the power dynamic, not ending discrimination. Oppression, once repackaged in progressive branding, suddenly becomes moral. So what we're seeing isn't isolated. It's a global phenomenon, a post-colonial rebrand of authoritarianism. One that cloaks itself in compassion while engineering division. One that weaponizes pain to justify permanent policy based on race, identity, and collective guilt. It's happening in Johannesburg. It's happening in Chicago. And it's already embedded in our media, our universities, and our public institutions here in America. And we have to push back immediately before things get truly out of control. Because let's be honest, South Africa is what happens when the ideology of equity is taken to its logical conclusion, when merit, law, and individual rights are replaced with revenge, quotas, and state-run redistribution. It doesn't end in fairness. It never does. It ends in famine and death. The activist isn't improvising. He was echoing policy that's already in motion. And the president isn't unaware. He's complicit. That's why he's trying to act like it doesn't exist. That's why we can't afford to treat America's equity obsession like a harmless academic exercise. It's not theoretical. It has a real-world trajectory, proven. We can see it in 4K, and we just watched the destination. This is the destination. So if you're wondering where America's current rhetoric leads, don't guess. Just look at South Africa, because this isn't a warning. It's a preview of the coming attractions. And since we're on the topic of previews, somebody who definitely wished he had gotten a preview screening of what was going to be shown during his meeting at the White House with President Trump is the president of South Africa, Ramaphosa, who ended up, oh wow, man, this has to be one of my favorite Trump moments ever. This beat the Zelensky stuff because this, wow, just watch it for yourself.
I would say if there was Afrikaner farmer genocide, I can bet you these three gentlemen would not be here, including my Minister of Agriculture. He would not be with me. So it'll take him, President Trump, listening to their stories, to their perspective. That is the answer to your question.
But Mr. President, I must say that we have, we have thousands of stories talking about it. Sure. And we have documentaries, we have news stories, and that is Natalie here, somebody here to turn that? I could show you a couple of things, and it has to be responded to.
Yeah, sure.
Let me see the articles, please, if you would, and turn the lights down, turn the lights down, and just put this on, it's right behind you.
There's nothing you can do, there's nothing this parliament can do, with or without you. People are going to occupy land. We require no permission from you, from the president, from no one. We don't care. We can do whatever you want to do. Who are you to tell us whether we can occupy land or not? We are going to occupy land. Yes. South African occupy land. That's who we are.
Honorable member,
you want to do.
Speaker,
you can withdraw my membership from this useless parliament.
Honorable. Yes, honorable member.
Must never be scared to kill. A revolution demands that at some point there must be killing, because the killing is part of a revolutionary act. Shoot to kill. Yamasa. Kill the poor, the farmer. Kill the poor, the farmer. Brr, pa. Pa. Brr, pa. Pa. To kill. Yamasa. Kill the poor, the farmer.
Oh man, man's sweating.
The mayor of DA in PE is a white man. So these people, when you want to hit them hard, go after a white man.
He is not happy.
They feel a terrible pain because you have touched a white man. Not because Mashaba and Soli will not be touched. They will be touched, don't worry. But we are starting with this whiteness. We are cutting the throat of whiteness.
Shoot to kill. Yamasa. Kill the poor, the farmer. Kill the poor, the farmer. Brr, pa. Pa. Brr, pa. Shoot to kill. Yamasa. Kill the poor, the farmer. Kill the poor, Obama! Brr, pa! Pa! Brr, pa!
This man's sweating.
I don't know what's going to happen in the future. I'm saying to you, we have not called for the killing of white people, at least for now. I can't guarantee the future.
Yeah, but I mean, you'd understand somebody watching that, especially as it gets shared on Twitter, they freak out. It sounds like a genocidal call.
Cry babies.
Wow.
Who will expropriate land without compensation, whether they like it or not. If they object, they can seek refuge in America.
Now this is very bad. These are burial sites right here. Burial sites. Over 1,000 of white farmers, and those cars are lined up to pay love on a Sunday morning. Each one of those white things you see is a cross, and there's approximately 1,000 of them. They're all white farmers, the family of white farmers. And those cars aren't driving, they're stopped there to pay respects to their family member who was killed. And it's a terrible sight. I've never seen anything like it. Both sides of the road, you have crosses.
Wow.
Those people were all killed.
Have they told you where that is, Mr. President? No, I'd like to know where that is, because this I've never seen.
Wow. Really?
Okay.
I mean, it's in South Africa. That's where.
We need to find out.
What? What we just witnessed was more than diplomacy. It was a reckoning. For the first time on the world stage, the leader of the free world forced the president of South Africa to confront the consequences of its country's racialized collapse. And he did it by pressing play. Now, Trump didn't lecture, he didn't moralize, he showed the tape, a compilation of clips, real people, real rallies, real threats, sometimes thousands of people screaming, "Kill the farmer, shoot to kill." Crowds chanting for blood, political leaders calling for land seizures, and a haunting memorial of white crosses lining a roadside, each one marking a murdered farmer. And there, on international broadcast, President Ramaphosa had nothing to say except to ask cluelessly where that memorial was located. Trump didn't blink, said South Africa. Now, to some, that moment may just be humiliating, but in reality, it was revealing. It exposed how far global leaders and elites are willing to go to pretend as though evil isn't happening under their watch. Ramaphosa came to Washington expecting trade deals, photo ops, and polite avoidance. He got accountability, and he wasn't ready for that. Now, later when pressed, Ramaphosa tried to downplay the threats, calling the people in the video small opposition parties, but Trump, as usual, cut through the spin. If they're so fringe, why do they fill stadiums? And most importantly, why has the ANC done nothing but dance around this topic, form weak coalitions, and gaslight the victims? Even Ramaphosa's own delegation couldn't deny the reality. Golfer Ernie Els said it best, 2 wrongs don't make a right. He didn't need to spell it out. Everyone in the room understood. Redif Goosen backed it up, acknowledging the rising violence and the collapsing rule of law. Johan Rupert added what we all know. This isn't just about race. It's about governance, about corruption, and about a country choking itself to death in ideology while pretending it's moral clarity. And Trump, he didn't flinch. He didn't get distracted by the NBC journalists trying to shift the conversation to Qatar or jets or anything but the brutal footage just shown, because that's what the media does. They deflect, distort, distract, and try to just drum up drama and chaos. But Trump, he held the line, and he made the South African president and the world look at what's really going on. And to be clear, this wasn't a genocide debate. This was the moment that denial broke. when South African leaders backed by corporate interests, DEI bureaucrats, and global press corps could no longer dodge the fact that their country is imploding under the weight of race-based revenge politics. The same politics now infecting America with mayors like Brandon Johnson or representatives like Jasmine Crockett or LaMonica McIver or Ayanna Pressley. I mean, we could go down the list of Democrats who purposely use racial grievance as their political platform. So to be clear, this isn't just South Africa's problem, it's a global warning. A culture that excuses racial violence, downplays ideological terrorism, and mocks victims as cowards is not on the road to progress. It's on the edge of collapse. Trump forced the mirror in front of Ramaphosa's face, and what it reflected was undeniable. The only question now is, who else is willing to look? Now, that being said, I wonder how our media reacted to all this. You know, the media who's known for honesty and having open dialogue and not trying to push an anti-Trump narrative. I sure hope that they value the fact that this genocide was brought to global attention. I mean, why wouldn't they? Are they pro-genocide now? Let's find out.
President Trump orchestrated another Oval Office ambush.
A political ambush inside the White House.
All of these videos, that the presentation that he made, the multimedia ambush that they've just presented with these videos and the printouts.
The dramatic scene in the Oval Office today, the tense confrontation, President Trump ambushing the president of South Africa.
But very quickly descended into Zelensky territory, where essentially he was a bit ambushed inside the Oval Office.
Why did they choose to ambush the South African president?
Jesus Christ.
In what appears to be somewhat of an ambush.
Oh my God.
From Singapore, this is BBC News. Another White House ambush. President Trump confronts his counterpart Cyril Ramaphosa with discredited claims of a white genocide in South Africa.
Another Oval Office meltdown. President Trump ambushing the president of South Africa and pushing unsubstantiated claims of genocide.
President Trump is being accused of conducting something of a diplomatic ambush of South Africa's president in the Oval Office with claims of, quote, white persecution.
Well, Katie, I mean, it was an ambush.
Felt like an ambush in there, kind of like the President Zelensky meeting in the Oval Office.
Cyril Ramaphosa brought his best diplomatic self to this meeting, but nothing could have prepared him for this multimedia ambush that President Trump laid out with video, with printed out news stories.
Well, I guess according to the media now, telling the truth is an ambush. That's the word of the week, ambush. CNN said it, MSNBC said it, ABC said it, BBC said it, all of them parroting the exact same phrase as if reading from a pre-approved script. Trump didn't expose atrocities. He didn't present facts. He ambushed the president of South Africa because apparently confronting a world leader with footage of politicians calling for the murder of white farmers and showing a field of white crosses isn't diplomacy, it's a hate crime. Now let's take a step back and ask the obvious, why does the truth require a trigger warning? Why is showing video evidence of political violence considered an assault, but chanting "kill the Boer" in a stadium packed with tens of thousands is just cultural nuance, I guess. This wasn't an ambush. It was accountability, and the media hated every second of it. It pierced the narrative they spent years constructing, one where oppressed and oppressor are fixed categories regardless of who's actually being hunted, silenced, or killed, and purely defined by race. What Trump did in that room was what the press used to do. Force power to confront reality, and yet journalists who spent 4 years claiming to speak truth to power now clutch their pearls the moment someone does it for real. They didn't fact check the footage. They didn't interview the families of murdered farmers. They didn't ask why Julius Malema still isn't in prison for inciting violence. Instead, they rushed to protect Ramaphosa's feelings because that's what the corporate press does now. Deflect from the facts and demonize the messenger. And to be clear, this isn't even about South Africa anymore. This is about the collapse of moral clarity in the West. When every institution from the New York Times to the BBC functions like a PR wing for identitarian politics, truth becomes dangerous. They're not journalists anymore. They're narrative enforcers. And the narrative is this: white people cannot be victims even when they are being murdered, especially then. And it goes beyond the corporate press just disagreeing with Trump. It's that he didn't ask for their permission. He didn't follow their rules. He didn't respect the polite choreography of fake diplomacy and filtered narratives. He went off script, and he showed the world what they've been trying to bury. So when they scream ambush, what they really mean is exposure, not of Ramaphosa, but of them, of the media's complicity in covering for regimes that racialize justice, weaponize history, and silence dissent. And that's why they're afraid. Because once the mask slips and people see the truth for themselves, the narrative doesn't survive, and neither do the institutions built to protect it.
There, Larry, has been debate over that song, that anti-apartheid chant, right? And for people who don't have a historical context, it does potentially appear more literal. Talk to us about the debate that has happened inside of South Africa with the recognition of how it appears to people when they hear those words.
It is an inflammatory song, without a doubt. And many in South Africa, even black South Africans, don't think it should be sung in a post-apartheid world, 30 years plus after apartheid. But there are many who grew up under those years of white minority rule who understand the historical context of this song, Kill the Boer, Kill the Farmer, that Julius Malema has made popular again. It sort of fell into disuse. It's not been that commonly sung after the end of apartheid in 1994, but it's brought it back again to animate the issue of the majority of land in South Africa still being owned by white farmers.
Yes, folks, your eyes do not deceive you. CNN just offended a genocidal chant. Not in theory, not in passing, but in calm, measured segment where they explained almost academically that kill the Boer, kill the farmer is really just an anti-apartheid chant. Come on, folks. As if that makes it any better. As if bloodthirsty slogans are acceptable as long as they're rooted in historical grievance. This is the kind of moral gymnastics that happens when identity politics becomes a religion and the media becomes its priesthood. So let's cut through the fog. The chant is not a metaphor. It's not symbolic. It's being sung at rallies where white farmers have been hunted, tortured, and murdered. It's been amplified by Julius Malema, a man who's built his political brand on racial scapegoating and economic redistribution by force. This isn't some forgotten protest song being played in a museum. It's a battle cry being used now in a country where farm attacks are real, brutal, and increasing. And CNN, well, they're just spinning it like it's good old country music. This moment tells you everything you need to know about the current state of Western media. If a far-right European politician had revived an old nationalist anthem that even hinted at violence against a minority group, CNN would have called it incitement. They'd be interviewing trauma psychologists within the hour. But when it's a chant targeting white South Africans, well, that's just complex history. You wouldn't understand. You're a white American. That's nuance. That's debate. And that double standard isn't just hypocrisy, it's ideology. The media doesn't report facts anymore. They enforce frameworks. And the framework is simple. Certain groups can only ever be victims. Others can only ever be oppressors. And that's purely defined by the amount of melanin you got in your skin. So when the so-called victims start calling for violence, the media's job is to contextualize, soften, and if needed, justify it. Because why not? This is how identitarianism works. Once you abandon universal moral standards, everything becomes situational. Kill the Boer doesn't get condemned outright because the people chanting it are viewed as historically oppressed. Their rage is seen as righteous, no matter how destructive, because we've replaced objective justice with grievance-based morality. And in this system, truth is less important than who's allowed to speak it. So CNN's offense of Kill the Boer isn't a standalone incident. It's part of a global pattern where legacy institutions bend over backward to shield certain ideologies from scrutiny, where equity replaces law, resentment replaces reason, and slogans replace substance. And when that happens, the people who suffer are the ones without media protection, those who don't fit neatly into their victim narrative. This is why we have to push back against these Marxists and the left's grip on cultural authority, because they're not just distorting the past, they're weaponizing it to control the present. Every time they justify racial hatred, silence dissent, or spin open threats into context, they're laying the foundation for a society where truth is dangerous and justice is tribal. We can't let that stand. If you still believe in equal standards, in the rule of law, in freedom, in a future where your rights don't depend on your skin color or political alignment, then it's time to speak up. It's time to reject these narratives, call out their lies, and demand a culture rooted in reality, not resentment. Because if we don't challenge this now, we're not just watching civilization unravel, we're participating in its surrender. So ask yourself, what kind of society are we becoming when truth is treated like an attack and calls for violence are excused as historical context? When justice is measured by identity and morality by memory, not merit? These aren't just distant problems, they're warning signs in our own backyard. How much longer can we pretend that moral clarity is optional, that double standards are sustainable, that institutional trust can survive when the people running the show redefine hate as heritage and silence as virtue? The narrative is cracking. The question is, will you keep repeating it or start seeing through it? That's why we can't just criticize this anymore. We have to crush it. The left has overrun our institutions and hijacked them to spread Marxist propaganda disguised as compassion, equity, and progress. They've turned our media into a megaphone for lies, our schools into indoctrination camps, and our government into a weapon used against its own people. They don't win by truth. They survive by deception. And that's where we win. They need to lie. We have the truth. So expose it. Every goal, every narrative, every sympathetic agent pretending to be neutral while advancing their revolution, they won't be shamed into retreat because shame is their currency. But they can't survive sustained truth. So take back the institutions, push back on every front, speak with clarity, act with boldness, and don't stop until the rot is ripped out and replaced with something worthy of inheritance. This is the fight, and now is the time to win it. You tell me what you think in the comments down below. Hope you have a terrific day. Peace.